About 10 years ago, I went camping in Ginny Springs in Florida. It's a popular spot, especially for college kids and families during the summer. It's beautiful, clear water, lots of springs, shaded trails, and wide campsites under big oak and cypress trees. I had been there before a few times with friends, so I thought I knew what to expect. Nothing ever seemed dangerous. The place always felt more like a party spot than actual wilderness. But that night changed the way I think about being outdoors. Changed the way I sleep under trees. Changed the way I listen to silence. I was around 24 and I went with a small group, me, my girlfriend at the time, and two of our friends. We got there on a Friday morning and planned to stay until Sunday. We were lucky to find a spot with some decent space and shade. Not far from the water, but not right on top of it either. We pitched 2 tents under a few tall trees. The canopy overhead was thick with green leaves, so we weren't too worried about sun or rain. The air was humid but not too bad. Just regular summer in Florida, kind of sticky. Friday was fun. We tubed down the river, grilled food, and drank a bit. Nothing crazy, just a few beers while we sat around the fire. Ginny Springs can get loud with other campers, but that night it wasn't too crowded. There was a group of college kids about 50 yards away who were a little noisy, laughing and playing music, but they weren't bothering us. Off to the left, maybe 100 feet through some trees, there was a family camped out. They had little kids and seemed quiet. Their lanterns were dim after dark, and I think they turned in early. We stayed up until maybe midnight, talking around the fire. Eventually, we all crawled into our tents. The air was still and thick with the smell of smoke, pine, and damp leaves. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt. Bugs chirping in the distance, the quiet rush of the river. My girlfriend fell asleep quickly. I lay awake for a while, listening to the woods. Sometimes it takes me a bit to drift off when I'm camping, especially when it's hot and I can feel the ground underneath my spine. Then, sometime deep into the night, maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard it. It was that sound you hear in movies, that low, deep rumble that gets louder and louder. Then the crack, that unmistakable sound of wood breaking under stress, followed by a crash so loud it made my whole chest vibrate. A tree had come down. It didn't sound super close, but not far either. It shook the ground. The air felt different afterward, like the whole place had exhaled at once. My first thought was that it was just one of those random things that happens in old forests. Trees fall. It didn't register as anything serious. It was Florida. Trees fall in storms all the time, even without wind sometimes. Roots rot. It wasn't unusual. I rolled over and closed my eyes again. But about 10 minutes later, I started hearing voices. At first, I thought it was just campers waking up. Maybe someone was spooked by the noise and got out of their tent to check it out. But the voices got louder. More people. A lot more. Some fast, some panicked, some too loud for that hour. I sat up and unzipped the tent. My girlfriend stirred but stayed asleep. Outside, it was dark. No moon. Just scattered headlamps and flashlights bouncing around between trees. I could see maybe 10 or 15 people gathered near the trees to the left, over where that quiet family had set up earlier. A few of them were yelling, not screaming, just talking in those sharp, urgent voices that come out when something serious has happened. I stepped out into the damp grass. My bare feet stuck to the mud. The smell of wet earth was stronger than before. I walked toward the group. I didn't ask anything. I didn't need to. Once I got close enough, I saw it. A tree, huge and thick, had split from its base and fallen right across the tent. Not just grazed it, landed directly on top of it. The trunk was wide, maybe 3 feet across, with limbs and leaves scattered like wreckage. The tent underneath was completely crushed. Poles bent, fabric torn, the whole thing flat under the weight. People stood around in shock, some with hands on their heads, others just staring. Someone had been inside that tent. A man, probably the father. I never found out his name. People were trying to pull the branches away, trying to lift the side of the tree, but it was obvious they couldn't move it. A few had phones out, calling 911, pacing in circles. You could hear someone crying, a child, I think, and a woman talking fast and shaky. I didn't want to look too closely, but from where I stood, you could see that someone was still under the fabric, unmoving. Part of their arm had slipped out. It didn't look right. The skin was pale, almost bluish in the light from someone's headlamp. More campers were waking up now, coming out of tents, walking up slowly, trying to understand what had happened. A few stayed back, maybe unsure whether to help or just stay out of the way. I stood there for a long time, not saying anything, not moving, just trying to process it. The weird thing was, there hadn't been any wind, no storm, no lightning. The tree had just fallen. Later someone said it was likely rot, that the roots had given out. But that didn't make it feel better. It made it worse. There was no warning, no reason. Just a normal night turned into the worst night of someone's life. After maybe 20 minutes, you could hear sirens in the distance. Paramedics had trouble getting in through the winding dirt roads that led to the campgrounds. Eventually, park staff started showing up with trucks, and someone led emergency vehicles in with flashlights. The area around the tree was lit up with flashing red and white lights. A helicopter came next. I don't know how long it took to get there. Maybe an hour or more, but when it came in, it blew the tops of the trees and flattened nearby tents with the force of its blades. The air was loud and hot and chaotic. They loaded the man's body onto a stretcher and lifted him out. I heard later he was pronounced dead at the scene. Crushed chest, massive head trauma. I never saw his face. Eventually, the campgrounds were mostly cleared. The family left. A few of the nearby campers packed up quietly and drove out, even though it was still dark. We stayed not because we wanted to, but because we didn't know what else to do. We lay awake the rest of the night, listening to the bugs come back, the silence settle in. The spot where the tree fell stayed roped off the rest of the weekend. No one went near it. The next morning, it was strange how normal everything looked. Sunlight through the leaves, birds calling out, the river still flowing, people still grilling breakfast, still walking around barefoot in swimsuits. But the air felt different, heavier, like the woods were holding something now. We packed up by noon and left early. I've camped many times since then, but I don't think I've ever fully relaxed under trees again. I look up now, every time. I check for dead limbs. I avoid leaning trees. I pick spots out in the open if I can, even if it means less shade or more heat. I check the ground for mushrooms and soft soil, the little signs that a tree's roots might be giving out. I still sleep, but it's a lighter kind of sleep, the kind where your ears are always open. The thing that sticks with me most is how sudden it was. No warning, just a sound like thunder and someone's life ended. No storm, no danger signs, just a quiet summer night turned into something else entirely. It wasn't fair. It wasn't dramatic or cinematic. It wasn't a lesson or a metaphor. It just happened. And it reminded me that nature doesn't care if you're having fun. It doesn't care how safe you feel or how many times you've done this before. Sometimes something breaks. Sometimes it falls. And sometimes it lands on you. When I was 17, I went on a camping trip that I still think about almost every week, even now. I'm older now, and I've done all kinds of things. Gone to school, moved cities, worked different jobs. But that one weekend hasn't left my head. We were camping in a part of northern Wisconsin, close to the edge of the national forest. It wasn't a family trip or a big group thing, just me and 2 other friends from school. We weren't wild kids, but we liked to get away from stuff. One of them had a cheap 2-person tent, and I had an old army surplus one that fit me just fine. We planned to stay 2 nights, brought everything we thought we'd need, and drove up on a Friday afternoon in my friend's beat-up sedan. We picked a spot that was part of a small primitive camping area. Free to use, but no running water, no toilets, no ranger station. There were about 10 marked sites in the woods, maybe a quarter mile from a gravel parking lot. Nothing fancy. Each spot had a fire ring and a flat patch for tents, and not much else. The forest was thick. Trees so tall they blocked out most of the sky. Mossy ground in every direction. Everything smelled like pine, old bark, and dirt. We weren't close to any other campers. That was part of the appeal. One site, maybe 300 yards to the north, had a family with kids, but we barely heard them. Another group came later that first night, 2 sites down, but they were quiet. felt like we had the woods to ourselves. The first day went fine. We walked some trails, made a fire, cooked hot dogs, talked about nothing. When it got dark, we stayed up for a while just staring into the flames, swatting at bugs, tossing sticks into the fire to see the sparks rise. Then one of my friends called it a night, said he was tired. The other followed. I stayed up a bit longer, just enjoying the quiet. Eventually, I zipped up inside my own tent and listened to the wind for a while. No traffic sounds, no electronics, no people yelling. Just leaves rustling, the occasional crack of a branch, and insects humming low. I fell asleep fast. The next day, we hiked a bit farther out, brought a small backpack with snacks and water, and followed a narrow trail that didn't show up on the map. It led out of the camping area and deeper into the woods, toward a stretch of forest that didn't seem very traveled. No trash, no footprints, not even any downed logs cut for walking paths. The deeper we went, the less it felt like a park and more like wilderness. About 2 miles out, we found an old rusted hunting stand nailed to a tree, maybe 15 feet up. Nobody had been on it in years. The steps were falling off, the platform above sagging from water damage. Not far from it, we found a faded blue tarp tied loosely between some trees. Underneath it was nothing but dirt, twigs, and a few old cans. We joked that someone must have been living out there at some point. We saw animal tracks nearby, maybe deer, maybe something bigger, but no people, no signs of anyone nearby. Eventually, we headed back to camp. It was later that night that things started to get strange. After dinner, one of my friends started getting stomach cramps. He'd eaten the same stuff as us, but he was pale and sweating. Said he felt lightheaded. We gave him water, let him lie down in the tent, and decided to stay close that night in case it got worse. I kept the fire going. My other friend went to check out the edge of the trail, just stretching his legs. I sat alone, watching the flames crackle, and noticed it was colder than the night before. A sharp drop, the kind that makes your fingertips stiff and the air feel thin. There was no wind anymore. Everything felt still, like something was holding its breath. That's when I heard the sound. Not footsteps, not talking, just something, movement, not far off. It was soft, like something dragging lightly across the forest floor. At first I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a deer. I aimed my flashlight and scanned around the edge of the campsite but saw nothing. Then I noticed the shape. Behind a tree about 20 feet out, barely visible, was someone crouching. A human shape, low to the ground, one arm reaching forward, still and tense like they were waiting for something. I stood up slowly. The fire popped behind me. I took a step forward, shined my flashlight directly at the spot. The person didn't move. It was a woman. She looked about 30, maybe a little older, wearing dark clothes, loose-fitting and baggy, stained with dirt and leaves. Her hands were on the ground like she'd been crawling. Her knees were bent tight, like she'd frozen mid-motion. Her head was slightly down, hair tangled and matted around her face. I didn't know what to do. I just stood there. Then she moved. Not fast. Slow, almost like she was stretching. She raised her head a little but didn't stand. Her eyes didn't meet mine, and she didn't say anything. Just lifted one arm and pressed her fingers into the dirt like she was testing it. Her whole body seemed tense, like she was trying to control something inside her. Her jaw moved side to side. Her shoulders twitched slightly, like she was fighting with her own muscles. I stepped back. My breath felt tight. I called for my friend, not yelling, just loud enough to hope he heard me. No answer. The woman turned her head a bit, just a bit. Her eyes were wide, but her face looked blank. Not scared, not angry, just off. Her mouth hung slightly open. There was something in the way she held herself that made her look more animal than person. It was hard to explain. She didn't speak, didn't move toward me, but she stayed crouched, one hand in the dirt, the other twitching a little like she didn't know what to do with it. Then, without warning, she dropped completely to all fours and crawled backward into the woods. Not standing, not running. Crawled, quickly, like she'd practiced. She didn't look back. I didn't move until I heard the crunch of footsteps behind me. My friend coming back. I turned, heart hammering in my chest. I told him someone was in the woods, acting weird, maybe watching us. We both scanned the trees with our lights. Nothing. She was gone. We didn't sleep well that night. My sick friend seemed a bit better by morning, but none of us were talking much. We packed up quietly and didn't even stay for breakfast. The car felt like safety. On the drive back, I kept thinking about her posture. The way she crouched, the way she moved like her joints didn't bend right. Her body language didn't match a drunk person or someone lost. It was controlled, intentional, like she was doing it on purpose, or like something was happening inside her that she couldn't control and she was trying to hold it in. I told myself it was probably just someone who was high or mentally unwell. That's what I told myself for a long time. And maybe that's true, but it didn't feel like that. It felt like we'd caught her in a moment she didn't want anyone to see. Like we'd walked up on something private. Not private like emotional, but private like dangerous. What really stuck with me was that backward crawl. People don't move like that unless they've done it before. She didn't panic. She didn't run. She didn't even act surprised to see me. She moved like someone who was used to disappearing into the woods. And the dirt on her clothes wasn't fresh. It was caked in layers, old and dry in some spots, wet in others. Like she'd been living out there, maybe for days, maybe longer. We looked it up later, checked online to see if anyone had gone missing in that area. Nothing. No reports. No alerts. No news stories. Just an empty stretch of woods near an old, forgotten trail. I still think about it. About her hands on the ground. The way her body shook, but her face stayed blank. The way she kept repeating tiny movements, like she was holding something back. Not a werewolf. Not a creature, just a person. But sometimes that's worse, because sometimes people become things. Not monsters, not supernatural, just different. Shaped by the woods, by isolation, by whatever's been brewing in their heads while they've been alone too long. And you won't know they're out there until you're close, until it's too quiet, until you hear them breathing in the dark, until you see what they've become. When I was younger, around 14 or 15, my family used to camp at a state park every summer. It was a tradition that had started when I was little, and even though I was getting older, I still looked forward to it. My parents liked the quiet and the change of pace, and I liked the freedom that came with it. I wasn't glued to my phone all day back then, and the woods gave me something different. It felt like we were in our own world for a few days. We always went to the same park. It wasn't anything fancy. Just a decent state park with a few dozen campsites spread out across the woods. A lake, a boat launch, some trails, and a small camp store that sold firewood, ice, and old candy. Our campsite was usually one of the ones farther from the main road, not completely isolated, but far enough that we didn't hear cars or people too much at night. I liked it that way. The trees were thick and tall, and the trails around our site connected to other paths that went deeper into the forest. My best friend came with us that summer. He and I had known each other since first grade, and by the time we were teenagers, we were more like brothers. He knew the routine. We'd pitch tents during the day, fish or mess around near the lake, and then at night, after the fire had burned down and our parents went to sleep, we'd go on a walk through the woods. We called it the ritual. Every single night, just the two of us, flashlights in our pockets but turned off. That was part of the challenge. It was like a game. We'd see how far we could get into the woods using only moonlight and our memory of the trails. The sounds of the woods at night, crickets, frogs, wind, the occasional owl were like background noise. We were used to it. The dark didn't scare us. It made everything feel more alive. That night, the air was a little cooler than usual. I remember that because I had to wear a hoodie over my t-shirt, and I could see my breath a little when I exhaled. It wasn't foggy, but the air was thick like it was holding onto moisture. The moon was out, but only about half full, so we didn't have as much light to work with. That made it more interesting. We started the ritual the same way we always did. Left the tent quietly, walked past the fire pit, and slipped into the trees. We didn't talk much when we were out there. Part of it was the atmosphere, but the other part was that it just felt right to stay quiet. Sometimes we'd whisper something like, "left," or "watch your step." but mostly it was just the sound of twigs snapping underfoot and the occasional animal rustling nearby. After a few minutes, we got farther than we usually went. We hadn't planned to go any deeper, but we didn't say anything about turning back. We were just moving forward, slowly, carefully, weaving between trees and stepping over fallen logs. Our eyes had adjusted to the dark by then. Everything looked different without the flashlight, like we were walking through a world that only existed at night. That's when we heard it, soft whispering. It was quiet, just behind us, and it didn't sound like words at first, just noise, like breath mixed with speech, like someone trying to talk without making actual sounds. My friend and I both stopped at the same time. We turned on our flashlights instantly, without saying anything, and spun around. Nothing, just trees. A wide clearing with patches of brush, dirt and dead leaves. No movement, no people. No animals either, as far as we could see. I remember scanning the trees with my light, slowly, thinking maybe it was the wind in the branches or something. But the air had been still. There wasn't even a breeze. We stayed still for a minute, lights pointing out into the woods, but there was nothing. After a while, we turned the lights back off and kept walking. We weren't scared, just curious. At that age, I think we both felt invincible in our own way, like nothing bad could really happen out there. We were wrong. About 100 feet farther, we heard it again. This time, it was more distinct, still whispering, but now we could hear bits of actual words. Random things, not sentences, not full thoughts, just strange, disconnected words. Open, corner, light, wait, down. None of them made sense. They didn't connect, but it was definitely a person, not an animal. A human voice. We stopped again, and this time we looked around longer. My friend moved his light through the trees slowly while I turned in a slow circle, trying to pick up movement in the shadows. Everything felt heavier now. The forest didn't feel like ours anymore. It didn't feel like the same trail we had walked for years. It felt wrong, like we were standing somewhere we weren't supposed to be. Then I saw her. She was crawling, just behind a thick patch of brush. A woman was on her hands and knees, moving slowly, dragging herself forward through the dirt. Her clothes were dark and loose, maybe black or dark gray, and they were soaked with mud and leaves. Her hair looked matted, hanging down over her face, and her skin, what little I could see of it, was pale and dirty. She didn't look up at us right away. She just kept whispering, still saying random words that didn't go together. For a second, I honestly didn't know if she was real. She was so quiet, so strange, and she didn't act like a normal person would in the woods. No flashlight, no shoes that I could see, and just the way she moved, it was wrong. Animal-like. Then she noticed us. She stood up slowly, like someone who had just remembered how to walk. She didn't stumble or reach out for help. She just got up, wobbled a bit, and then looked right at us. That's when the fear hit. Not the jump scare kind, the slow kind, the cold kind that creeps up your spine and makes you feel like your body isn't listening to your brain anymore. My hands felt numb on the flashlight. My legs felt like they wanted to run in opposite directions. She said she was looking for her campsite. Her voice wasn't angry or panicked. It wasn't even scared. It was flat, like she wasn't fully there. She stood still, arms hanging at her sides, clothes heavy with dirt. Her hands were scraped and raw, like she had been crawling for a long time. There were leaves stuck in her hair. Her lips were dry and cracked. Her eyes looked glazed over, unfocused. We didn't know what to do. We didn't speak, just looked at each other, then at her. Then we started walking back toward the campground, slowly, making sure she followed us. She did. No questions, no hesitation. Just walked behind us like she had known we were going to lead her back all along. It took us almost half an hour to get back to the outer edge of the campsites. The whole way, she said almost nothing except for the occasional quiet, strange word again, sometimes repeating what she'd already said before. She never asked our names, never said hers, never said thank you, never asked where we were going, just followed. Once we hit the main gravel path, things felt more normal. The sound of the fire crackling at a nearby site, the smell of smoke and cooked food, even the occasional laugh from another camper. It all came back, and it was like we'd been gone for days. We found a group of people who recognized her. They hadn't even realized she was missing. They laughed when we told them where she had been, said she had been drinking and maybe took something else too. She had wandered off looking for the bathroom and apparently gotten turned around in the woods. They thanked us eventually, but it was casual, like we'd just found a dropped backpack or something. We went back to our site and didn't say much. Neither of us slept well that night. I kept thinking about the way she moved through the woods, how quiet she had been, how far she had gotten from camp. Half a mile, maybe more, crawling through underbrush, whispering to herself. No one looking for her, no one noticing she was gone. The next day, the group packed up and left early. We didn't see her again. That night, we didn't go on our ritual. We didn't go the night after that either. Something had changed. The woods didn't feel the same anymore. They still looked the same in the daylight, still smelled like pine and old leaves and smoke, but we both knew what was out there now. Not monsters or ghosts, just people. Real people, lost and confused and alone in the dark. That was somehow worse. Even now, years later, I still think about that woman. How close she came to not being found. If we hadn't gone that deep into the woods that night, if we had turned back after the first whisper, she probably would have been out there till morning. Maybe longer. Maybe she would have wandered even deeper. Maybe she wouldn't have made it back. And the scariest part? No one would have known. Not her friends. Not the other campers. Not the park rangers. No one was looking for her. We just happened to be there. Right place, right time. A mistake, really. Just two kids playing a game in the woods at night. And sometimes, I still hear it in my head. That whisper. Those strange, broken words with no meaning. Just sound in the dark. Just a voice that almost disappeared. I've been a safari guide in the South African Lowveld for over 8 years now. I've spent more nights under canvas tents than I can count, in all seasons and all kinds of weather. I've tracked lions on foot, stood still while elephants passed within arm's reach, and helped tourists stay calm while hyenas circled our camp at night. But nothing, absolutely nothing, has ever made me feel as exposed, as small, or as powerless as that one winter morning when I woke up and realized I wasn't alone in my tent. It was the middle of July, deep winter in the southern hemisphere, and the Lowveld can get bitterly cold at night. Not snow cold like in the mountains, but the kind of cold that soaks into your bones, especially when the wind comes in from the east. Temperatures had dropped to just above freezing the night before. It was one of those still, dry nights where the stars hang low and sharp, and every sound travels for kilometers. We were 2 guides out on a training break, spending a week camping far from the tourist routes, just the 2 of us in the bush. We'd set up camp in a dry riverbed. The sand was soft, and the area was surrounded by thorn thickets and knob thorns. There were game paths nearby, and lion tracks had been spotted the day before. But I wasn't worried. We'd made a proper fire, kept the meat sealed, and followed every safety rule in the book. We each had a small canvas dome tent and set them close together. My buddy was in his own tent just a few meters away from mine. We knew the area well. We'd both camped here before. That night, I went to bed wearing thermal underwear, wool socks, and a fleece zipped up to my neck. I had a thick sleeping bag, and I even tucked a hot water bottle inside before crawling in. Despite all that, it had still been cold enough to wake me a couple times. Around midnight, I'd stirred from the wind against the canvas. At about 3 a.m., I woke again, feeling the heat from the water bottle starting to fade. I rolled over, pulled the sleeping bag tighter, and tried to sleep again. I don't know what time it was when I first noticed something was off. I wasn't fully awake yet. You know that strange fog between dreams and waking, when your body is still heavy, but your brain starts picking up that something doesn't feel quite right? That's where I was. There was heat on my back. A lot of it. Felt oddly good at first. Warm, gentle, solid but soft, like a thick cushion. My back was pressed against the side of the tent, and whatever was outside was leaning or lying right up against it. I didn't move at first. I just stayed there, confused, staring at the top of the tent and trying to figure out what I was feeling. The heat was strange, consistent, like another person lying beside me, except outside the tent. My body began to wake up fully. My senses sharpened. The warmth was too real, too steady, too solid. I knew my tent wall was thin canvas. There wasn't anything between me and whatever was pressing against it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. It wasn't another human being. It was alive. And that's when the cold realization hit me like ice water. This wasn't just something. This was an animal, a large one. It had to be lying right against the tent wall, stretched out. The body heat was intense. It had a scent too, earthy, faintly musky, not unpleasant, just wild. I stopped breathing for a moment. I stayed absolutely still. My heart pounded in my ears. All the possibilities raced through my mind. Hyena, maybe, a big male, a leopard, but none of them would lie this still. None would press up for warmth like this. Then I remembered the lion tracks we'd seen the day before. Big ones, male. That's when I understood. It was a lion, a big one, a full-grown male, and it was sleeping against my tent for warmth. I couldn't move. I didn't dare breathe deeply. Every instinct screamed at me to freeze. My back was inches from a predator capable of killing a Cape buffalo with one bite. The canvas was nothing. A sneeze would bring it crashing down. If it heard me, if it smelled me, if it decided I was a threat or a meal, there would be nothing between us. I don't know how long I stayed there, muscles clenched, barely breathing. My brain was spinning in circles. There was no way to call for help. No way to reach my radio or my knife. Even if I could, what would I do? There was no fighting something like this. I just had to wait, pray, hope it moved on. Then, a sound broke the silence. Not from the bush, but from the other tent. A soft, shaking voice. My buddy. He spoke my trail name, which we'd been using for years on the field. The Africa bug. He was whispering, but I heard the tremble. He must have seen the shape from his tent or maybe just sensed it too. I stayed quiet. I wanted to stay quiet, but without thinking, I answered. Loud, too loud. My voice came out clear, solid. That was my mistake. The warmth on my back shifted instantly. A huge body stood up, fast, powerful, and silent except for the brush of rough fur against the canvas. The tent shifted slightly from the weight. I held my breath as I heard paws land softly on the ground. Then came the unmistakable sound of large feet padding away in the sand. No rush, just calm, casual. When I finally moved, my arms were shaking. I rolled away from the side of the tent, heart racing. I could still feel the ghost of that warmth on my back. I waited in silence, listening. Nothing.
No roar, no gravu, no forte falso.
Just the breeze moving through the bush outside. Eventually, I heard a zipper. My buddy stepped out very slowly. I followed a few minutes later. We didn't speak. Not for a long time. We walked the perimeter of the campsite. In the sand, less than a meter from my tent, we found the tracks. Huge paw prints. Round.
No claw marks.
The kind that make your stomach drop. It had circled the tents, sniffed the fire pit, rubbed against a tree, and then it had decided to lie down right next to my tent, using it for shelter from the cold wind. Maybe it felt the heat from my body and liked it. Maybe it just wanted a break from the chill. I'll never know. Later that morning, when the sun had risen enough to warm the ground, we found where it had gone. The tracks led up the bank of the dry riverbed, then disappeared into the brush. We never saw it again, but that entire day we moved more carefully than ever before. Every rustle, every bird call, every breeze made us jump. That night we didn't sleep. We just lay in our tents, eyes wide open, ears tuned to the dark. It's strange, thinking how close I came to something that could have killed me so easily. I've told people for years that lions rarely attack tents, that they don't see humans inside as prey, that the fabric of the tent, the smell of smoke, the unfamiliar sound of nylon zippers, all of it usually keeps them away. But that night, none of those rules applied. That night, the lion didn't care about the fire or the fabric or the rules of man. It was cold, he was tired, and I was warm, and that was enough. We packed up the next day. left the site clean, didn't tell many people. Most wouldn't understand. Most would think we were exaggerating or reckless or lucky, and maybe we were. But I don't think about it like that. I think about the weight of that warmth, about how small I felt in my sleeping bag, about the absolute silence of the bush when something that dangerous decides to lie down beside you. It's the silence I remember most. And now, every winter night in the bush, when the wind picks up and the stars are sharp and the fire burns low, I feel my back twitch when I lie down in the tent. I don't sleep near the wall anymore. I center myself like I'm inside a shell, because out there, in the dark, some things don't care about tents or people or plans. They care about warmth, and they'll find it, even if it's you. My uncle has always been one of those guys who needs to move. He's not the kind of person who sits around watching TV. He's got an old trailer, a few dirt bikes, and a bunch of friends who are always up for a long weekend out in the desert. They do it every year, a few times if they can. Usually the same desert patch out in the open parts of Arizona. Miles of dirt, brush, and low hills. Just you, your machine, and the sun. I went out with them once. It was years ago and I couldn't keep up. It's all dust and sunburn if you're not into it. But I still remember how far you feel from anything out there. The kind of silence that makes your own breathing sound too loud. It's beautiful in a way, but it gets in your head too. Anyway, my uncle told me this story a few years back, and it stuck with me. Gave me that slow creep feeling you don't shake off right away. He swears it really happened. And knowing how no nonsense he is, I believe him. It was one of their usual desert trips. Him, two of his close friends, and one guy they knew through someone else. I don't remember his name. They pulled the trailer into a flat, open patch of dirt about a mile from the next closest group, who were barely visible on the horizon. Out there, even a mile feels like nothing, especially with the dry air and wide open spaces. They parked, leveled the trailer, and set up their stuff: chairs, a fire pit with a ring of stones, coolers full of beer and meat, a folding table for tools. The dirt bikes were lined up like horses at a hitching post, some older, some newer, all in good shape. They rode for hours that first day, came back covered in sweat and dust, cooked up some steaks, and had a decent fire going into the night. According to my uncle, they didn't drink crazy that night. A few beers each. They weren't 20 anymore. They sat around the fire until about 11, then put it out with the last of the cooler water and dirt, kicked the embers into the sand, and turned in. The fire was dark, but you know how it is, those coals stay hot under the top layer, still smoldering underneath. The trailer has a small generator they use to run a fan and lights. It's not big, just enough to keep the place comfortable at night. In the morning, they usually let the sun do most of the work. But if it gets cold, someone starts it up again just for heat. That morning, my uncle was the first one up. It was just barely light out, sky turning pink and blue, but the sun not fully above the hills yet. That strange kind of quiet, cold. You'd think the desert is always hot, but those mornings can bite your fingers off if you're not layered up. He put on a hoodie, stepped outside in his boots, and walked toward the little side enclosure where they kept the generator. That's when he saw the guy, sitting there, just sitting, in one of their folding chairs, not moving, no shirt, bare feet, jeans and a ball cap pulled low, sitting close to where the fire had been the night before, the coals still faintly steaming in the cold. It was jarring. My uncle said it was like walking out your front door and seeing a stranger sitting on your porch, just waiting. But worse, because you're in the middle of nowhere. No cars, no houses, no one but your group. He looked around first, thinking maybe one of the other guys had gotten up early and brought someone over, but the bikes were all untouched. Trailer door still half closed. Nobody else was up, and there was no sign of another vehicle. No tracks, just flat dirt and old tire marks from their trailer. He stood there watching the guy for a while. The man wasn't moving, head tilted down, breathing slow, not quite asleep but not alert either, just slumped. My uncle thought maybe the guy was sick, or had heat stroke from the day before, or had taken something. It wasn't normal behavior. He didn't approach. He stepped back, went into the trailer, and got the others up. No yelling, just shook their shoulders and motioned to the door. They all looked outside, saw the guy, and stood there for a while trying to process it. He wasn't doing anything threatening, just sitting like he belonged there. Eventually, one of the guys walked out, cautious but firm. The man in the chair flinched when he got close, sat up, wiped at his face like he'd just come to, looked around, confused. My uncle watched the whole thing. No one really knew what to do with him, but once he was alert, he mumbled something none of them could fully hear. Looked around like he just woke up in someone else's bed. Then he pointed vaguely off in the distance and made a gesture like asking for help. He wanted a ride. He said, without much detail, that his camp was somewhere over there, and he needed a lift back. My uncle and his friend looked at each other, didn't say much, and finally just agreed. They didn't want to leave the guy stranded, and he didn't seem dangerous now that he was standing. Just lost, sunburned, dry-lipped, and shaken. So they loaded him up into the front seat of the truck and drove in the direction he pointed. My uncle says they went about 3 miles. The desert road curved up a bit, past some brush, and eventually they came over a ridge and saw a bigger camp. A few trailers, some side-by-sides, one big RV, and a couple of flags stuck into the dirt. It looked more like a full setup. Lots of people, organized gear, and even a small windbreak wall made from tarps. And standing there were 2 state troopers talking to a group of people. One guy was holding his head in his hands. A woman was pacing. A kid was sitting on the step of an RV with a blanket around her shoulders. They pulled up, and before they could say anything, one of the people from the group shouted. They came running. One of them yelled something, and everyone turned to look. Turns out, the guy in the chair had wandered off around 2 in the morning. Drunk, real bad. He'd gotten into a golf cart they had with their group and just took off into the night like it was nothing. He'd run it for about 1.5 miles before it ran out of gas. From there, he got out and walked barefoot in a mostly straight line until he found my uncle's trailer. No flashlight, no shoes, no shirt, just jeans and a hat. The troopers said they'd been looking for him since just before dawn. They were about to send out a search party further out into the brush. It's dangerous to walk around drunk in the desert at night. Easy to trip, hit your head, or just collapse from the cold. But somehow, he'd walked the right direction and landed in a chair like he belonged there. My uncle didn't stick around long after they handed him off. The troopers thanked them, took their names, and let them head back. Nothing illegal happened, really. Just a guy getting lost after drinking too much. But it stuck with him. And when he told me about it later, it stuck with me too. Because there's something about waking up in the deep silence of the desert, stepping outside your trailer, and seeing a man just sitting in one of your chairs with no reason for being there. Something about that. Something too still and too quiet that sticks in your memory. He said the part that really bugged him was how the guy didn't try to explain himself. He didn't ask for help right away. He didn't say where he came from. He just sat there like it was normal, like he'd been waiting, and it wasn't like they were close to any town. The nearest highway was at least 12 miles out. No cell signal, no buildings, nothing but dirt and scrub and the occasional Joshua tree. How far do you have to walk, in the dark, barefoot, drunk, with no flashlight, to make it to a stranger's trailer? The answer is just far enough to make everyone uncomfortable. My uncle and his friends finished out the weekend, but they didn't sleep quite the same after that. They took turns getting up early. They started parking one of the dirt bikes in front of the door at night. They didn't say much about it to each other, but you could feel it. The mood had shifted. The rest of the trip went smooth. No more strangers. No more chairs with strange men in them. But the memory stayed with them. It stays with me too, and I wasn't even there. There's no big ending. No violence. No twist. Just a reminder that even in the middle of nowhere, when you think you're alone, someone can still appear out of the dark, barefoot, silent, uninvited, sitting right in your chair like he's part of your group. And even if there's a simple explanation, alcohol, poor judgment, luck, it still leaves you with that feeling of something not quite right, something just slightly off. And sometimes that's worse than anything else. It wasn't meant to be anything special, Just a quick camping trip thrown together last minute. My brother, his roommate, and me, we'd all had a rough week, each for our own reasons. I think we just wanted to get away for a bit. No real planning went into it. We loaded up some gear, tossed some beer in a cooler, grabbed firewood from a gas station pile, and headed out. We ended up in one of those half-developed campgrounds. Cleared out dirt pads, metal fire rings, and picnic tables that had seen too many winters. The kind of place where they charge you $5 for a spot and nobody checks if you paid. It was quiet, no real traffic, just a few others scattered far off across the hills. Good place to be loud and forget about things. We got there around 4 in the afternoon. It was spring, early enough in the year that the nights still got cold, but warm enough to enjoy the fire. We set up quick, tent on flat ground, sleeping bags spread out, beers cracked open by 5. The sun dipped behind the tree line around 7, and we got the fire going soon after. We made some sloppy hot dogs, passed the bottle around, and talked about dumb stuff until the flames got low and our eyes got heavy. There wasn't anything spooky about the place. No eerie quiet, no strange smells or far-off noises. Just wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. We all turned in around midnight, probably a little drunk but not gone. The kind of sleep you fall into fast and deep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was still dark. I could feel cold air pressing down on my nose where it stuck out from the sleeping bag. First, I thought I just stirred for no reason, but then I heard it metal clanging, like someone hitting a pole against something. Then a voice, loud, slurred, screaming something I couldn't make out. It wasn't a yell for help or anything. It was just chaotic, almost like someone fighting with the air itself. I lay still, blinking into the dark of the tent. A second later, I felt my brother's elbow nudge my side. He'd heard it too. His roommate was already sitting up. I could hear his sleeping bag shift. The noises were coming closer, still shouting, metal scraping now, footsteps crunching over the gravel that led between campsites. The voice was male, angry or scared or just messed up. At first I thought maybe it was just someone drunk from a nearby site, yelling at a friend or tripping over something. But then I realized it was the middle of the night. We hadn't seen any other fires when we'd gone to bed. No cars parked nearby. And this voice, it wasn't slowing down. It was heading right toward us. The pole, whatever it was, kept banging against things. Trees, maybe metal signs, a trash can, each sound louder than the last. I tensed. My brother reached for his bag and I heard the distinct sound of metal sliding against fabric. He'd brought his pistol. Legally. Always did. Didn't make a show of it, just thought it was better safe than sorry. In that moment, I didn't blame him. The footsteps were right outside the tent now. No more yelling, just ragged breathing and shuffling. Something brushed the outside of the tent wall. Maybe a stick, maybe his hand. It made the whole thing flex inward for a moment. That's when my brother chambered around. The sound was crisp, even in the cold. We didn't say a word. Not a single sound from inside the tent. Just the low, threatening click of readiness. The breathing outside paused. Then the steps moved away. Slow. Not running, but not casual either. The man, whoever he was, moved off toward the edge of the site. I held my breath for what felt like minutes. Then came the sirens. Fast and close. Blue and red lights started flickering through the trees. The crunch of tires on dirt. Then doors opening. Shouted commands. More metal banging. Shouts from the man, this time clearer but still wild, and then something else. A loud pop followed by a buzz. Then another, and a heavy thump. Dead weight hitting ground. Tasers. We stayed in the tent, still silent, until we heard voices more clearly. Officers moving, checking him, calling in their position. They didn't come to our tent. Didn't ask us anything yet. Just took care of the guy and radioed it all in. Eventually, we unzipped the tent and peeked out. I saw flashlights sweeping the ground. A sheriff's SUV idling on the dirt road. One officer writing something down. The man, the one with the pole, was face down on the gravel a few feet from the fire ring. His arms were zip-tied behind his back and he wasn't fighting anymore. The pole was just a length of metal piping. Looked like something torn off a grill or maybe pulled from a construction site. I don't know how he got it. He wasn't bleeding, but his face looked scraped up, probably from the fall. One of the cops finally came over and asked if we were all right. We nodded. He took a quick statement, nothing serious, just asked what we saw or heard. My brother kept the pistol tucked in the bag. Didn't mention it, and they didn't ask. The officer said the man had been reported earlier in the night. Someone had seen him wandering near the highway acting strangely. High on something, they said. Maybe meth, maybe bath salts. Hard to say. No ID on him. No shoes either. They took him away not long after that. Another cruiser pulled up and he was loaded into the back. No yelling now, just still. We didn't sleep much the rest of the night. Mostly just lay there, eyes half closed, ears sharp to every twig snap or gust of wind. But in the morning, when the sun came up and the campsite was warm again, it didn't feel as intense. We made coffee over the fire. My brother's roommate burned the bacon, but it didn't matter. We laughed a little, called the guy Pole Man, and imagined the report those cops had to write. My brother made a joke about how cocking the pistol probably worked better than any doorbell alarm. It wasn't scary in the classic sense. No ghost stories or blood trails, but it was weird as hell. The kind of thing you don't expect when all you want is a peaceful night outside. Just us, some cheap beer, and the quiet of the woods. It reminded me how thin the line is out there, between calm and chaos, between a normal night and a strange one. That guy probably didn't even mean to scare anyone. But one wrong move and it could have gone a different way. We packed up that afternoon and drove home. Windows down, radio low. Took a while to stop glancing in the mirrors. Not because we thought someone was following us. Just lingering nerves. Even now, I think about that man. How far did he walk barefoot? What was he trying to do with that pole? Did he even know where he was? And mostly, how many times does stuff like that happen out in the woods, where no one's around to see? I still camp, but I don't sleep as hard as I used to. Not because of animals or ghosts, but because there are real people out there, wandering in the dark with no plan, no shoes, and sometimes a metal pipe in their hand. It started out like any other backpacking trip. Just me and two friends, all three of us craving a break from the city and the noise. We'd planned a moderate route through a section of national forest we'd never been to before. The kind of place with a few marked trails, some patches of thick trees, and a quiet river running through the valley. We were looking forward to a few days of fresh air, some long hikes, and sleeping under the stars. We packed light, carried enough food and water for 3 days, and set off early on a Saturday morning. The trail was muddy from a recent rain, but the weather looked good, overcast but stable. We made good time, taking breaks by the river and spotting a few deer from a distance. By late afternoon, we found a small clearing that looked perfect for camping, a flat area with some pine trees for shelter, and a good spot for a fire ring. We pitched our tents, set up our sleeping bags, and built a modest fire. The wind picked up a bit, and the sky darkened with heavy clouds. We checked the weather app on our phones. It warned of thunderstorms rolling in overnight. We tightened the rain flies on our tents and gathered extra firewood. Around 9:30 p.m., the first drops began to fall, steady and cold. We put out the fire and zipped up tight inside our tents. The rain hammered down through the night. Thunder rolled distant and loud, sometimes close enough to shake the ground. We tossed and turned a bit, but eventually the sound of the storm and the rhythm of the rain became a strange kind of lullaby. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, even with the storm. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, the world shrank to the sounds outside our thin walls. When morning came, the rain had stopped. The air smelled fresh and wet, the ground soaked and glistening. We climbed out of our tents, stretching stiff limbs and rubbing sleep from our eyes. That's when we noticed him. He was sitting by a small campfire, smoking a cigarette. His tent was pitched a few yards from ours, nestled in a patch of bushes that had offered some shelter from the worst of the wind. He looked to be in his late 30s, maybe early 40s. His clothes were worn but clean, and his backpack was old but functional. There was something about him, an easy smile, calm eyes, that suggested he wasn't dangerous, friendly even, but still. We hadn't seen anyone else on the trail yesterday. We hadn't passed anyone at all since we left the parking lot. And when we'd gone to bed, it was just the three of us. There was no way he could have come in unnoticed, or could he? He greeted us warmly, asking if we could share some of our firewood. We nodded, a little surprised, and passed over some dry sticks. He didn't mention how or when he'd arrived. Neither did we. Over breakfast, we watched him pack up his gear. He told us he was heading east, following the trail along the river. We shared some food and water before parting ways. He disappeared down the path without a trace. The whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Later that day, as we trekked through thick woods and crossed rocky streams, I kept thinking about his tent in our campsite. The fact that someone had quietly set up camp during a storm, in the dark, without us noticing. How? We'd been so careful. No extra footprints around our tents in the morning. No disturbed ground. And the bushes where his tent was pitched were thick, almost impossible to move through silently. But he'd done it anyway. That night, back at another campsite several miles down the trail, we double-checked our tents before falling asleep. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the rustling trees and distant calls of animals. The memory of that man, setting up beside us as if it was nothing, gnawed at me. Was he just a lonely hiker looking for shelter? A harmless wanderer? Or someone who slipped in for reasons we didn't understand? The next day, when we got back to the trailhead and cell service returned, I checked local news on my phone. There was a brief report about a missing man spotted in the area, a middle-aged guy known to wander the woods. Police warned hikers to be cautious. It hit me then. Maybe that was him. Maybe he'd been following us, or maybe he was just trying to find a safe place to wait out the storm. Either way, he'd chosen our campsite without telling us, without us knowing. I felt a mix of relief and unease. Relief that he seemed harmless, and unease because we never saw him arrive or leave. The woods can be strange like that. People come and go. Paths cross when you least expect it. Some moments stay with you, not because they're full of danger or fear, but because they remind you how little you really know about what's going on just beyond your sight. In the end, we finished our trip without any other strange encounters. The forest returned to quiet, and life went back to normal. But every time I go back out there now, I check my campsite twice, make sure the tent flaps are zip tight, and listen closely for footsteps in the night. Because sometimes people show up where you least expect them, and sometimes they don't leave.